Hi, hello, excellent 126 scholars. Today's lesson is about strategies to organize, present, outline, format your scholarly argument. Before we jump into the lesson, take this moment to print the lesson slides if you find that helpful, or you can download to your device. Anything that helps you follow along, annotate, take notes. Specifically, I like to provide the slides so that instead of just copying information, you have the chance to write, like you could have the information, but then you have also the chance to write down how this might apply to your work, a space to write down questions that you would like to share, a space to make question marks, stars, circles on things that you would like more clarification or more discussion from. So before we jump in, I'm going to stall a little bit, give you guys time. You need to pause the video, download, save, or print the lesson slides that are attached to the Canvas page for the lesson. And then when you're ready, we will jump in. All right, today's lesson is all about the scholarly argument. Strategies and techniques for you to begin participating in the discourse for your topic. This lesson is going to take a look at, first of all, what is scholarly writing, specifically looking at where does your voice, where does your view fit into the discussion. Reminder about that rhetorical situation. So this was that technical vocabulary that came up in our in-class meeting on Tuesday. Just remembering the relationship between you as a writer, the purpose that you want to fulfill, your goal, your intentions, the specific audience that you want to speak to. So if you keep in mind a collection of people that you want to reach, that will help you sort of decide your form, content, style, the ingredients and the presentation that will help you best fulfill your purpose for that audience. And then techniques, so solid writing techniques to influence your audience. So we'll look at common ingredients for scholarly, argumentative, persuasive writing. Some common ways that those ingredients are remixed. So you might have heard of these words. They're kind of technical, but we'll look at the Aristotelian, Toulmin, and Rogerian argument styles. It's kind of hoity-toity, but it's in the curriculum. And then I'm also going to throw in another remix focusing on Indigenous writing styles from some research I've been doing. And then that reminder that these are the traditions and it's your, right or privilege or whatever to remix those ingredients in a way that feels intuitive to you, to your self-expression. So there's the preview. Let's jump in, starting with, when my mouse wakes up, starting with what is scholarly writing. So first of all, the characteristics of scholarly writing involves joining into that academic conversation that you have been viewing and evaluating and understanding in the research. So you want to enter into a research-based discussion of your topic. You want to give fair and comprehensive attention to the existing views that you've already discovered. So this is a term that comes up a lot in the textbook readings, but just that reminder that if we are dealing with research fairly, that means that we are objectively representing other people's viewpoints, without bias, without distorting. When we select quotations to include in our argument, we need to select quotations that have an accurate representation within context of that person's argument. So not just a manipulative soundbite, for example. And then also a comprehensive view is recognizing both sides. So in a minute, we'll dig deeper into the structure of they say, I say, as a contextual relationship between the research conversation and your own viewpoints. So we'll do that on the next slide. Another common characteristic for scholarly writing is academic language. So you want to practice elevating your word choice. And of course, as always, this comes in the revision and editing phase. When we're brainstorming, outlining, and drafting, we're just using our everyday language. It might be chaotic, it might have slang, it might be casual or confusing. But as we revise, as we edit, we really want to apply words and phrases from our critical thinking lessons and readings. One way to also do this is to apply similar words and phrases that is used in the research that you've discovered. So as you review your sources, as you mine for good evidence, you might notice like, oh, here's a really common phrase, here's a really common terminology that keeps coming up. It might sound obvious or redundant to you since you have a little bit of expertise in this topic, but remember your readers. Remember that you're speaking to people who haven't done the same research as you. So use that similar language that you've discovered. Other characteristics of scholarly writing is like a real intentional and meaningful organizational structure. And that's what today's lesson is kind of all about. Overall, we want to have an intentional focus. So as you're developing your paragraphs or your subtopics, whether you're doing like a speech, a video essay, whether you're doing some kind of a visual presentation, like a slide presentation or an infographic, a poster, whatever it is, you want to discuss one topic at a time. So for each topic, include context, evidence, and significance, and complete that small part of the discussion before moving on to another focused piece of the discussion. Also, along with those lines, you want to create a meaningful flow. So moving with intention and purpose from one topic to the next, whether that's like building intensity, building the relevance. Sometimes we go from general to specific. Sometimes we go from like the personal or the individual out to the cultural, the global. So having like a meaningful flow to shape your discussion, and then using those signal phrases, transition words. A lot of attention in the textbook has been lent to signal phrases and transition words. And then remember when we did the rhetorical strategies lesson, we had a slide and a supplemental handout for signal phrases and transition words. So keeping that stuff in mind. Moving on, we want to dig a little bit deeper into that thing that I mentioned, the they say, I say contextual relationship. So They Say, I Say is just a really common textbook from English 122. A lot of you might have already been exposed to this if you had English 122 here at DVC. All in all, the purpose of the book is to provide context for sharing your viewpoints, and the technique for this is first summarizing what you've discovered in the research, and then introducing your own conclusions, your own viewpoints, and your own responses to that evidence. Some techniques include like sentence frames. So if you want to join into a conversation and you're on a paragraph or a subtopic that's speaking about the context or the background, or maybe a phrase like this appears in the introduction paragraph right before your thesis, you might say something along the lines of like, who's been talking about this? And then where does your voice fit in? So the example I'm sharing, environmental researchers, journalists, social media creators, and everyday consumers are debating the cultural shift from combustion engines to electric vehicles. But despite many benefits, I remain wary of the overall dangers that have not been fully explored, fully considered, whatever have you. So this is like some context that sets you up to then introduce some background information, some direct quotes from those types of sources. And it sets you up to explain and dig deeper into your perspective and your stance. Similarly, type of structures, if you're introducing like the problems that are circulating around your topic, you might say something like, psychologists have long warned that excessive social media use is harmful to our mental health, and I have experienced these damaging effects firsthand. So again, it sets you up, like this would be like a topic sentence for a paragraph or for a subtopic, and it sets you up to provide that evidence from psychologists, then to provide your experience, and then dig into analysis about the harmful effects on mental health. Similarly, one more example, introducing the solution. So remember, we want to give problems and solutions. You might say, along with human rights activists and social justice writers, I strongly urge all readers to actively resist hate-based ideologies by demanding rights and protections for all members of the trans community. So this kind of claim, this kind of topic sentence sets you up to share the work that has already been done by human rights activists and social justice writers. Join your voice into that momentum, into that solution, and you're encouraging the readers directly to change their behaviors, change their actions, to make demands. So there's just a few sentence frames. It's helpful if you do have the slide handout. That way you don't have to copy these things down. But it's also helpful to use maybe the discussion space here in Canvas to draft and play around with these types of sentence structures to see how you might introduce contexts, problems, solutions, other talking points that you want to explore. You can sample those out in the discussion space in this lesson. You want to pause the video, and we can take a look and discuss those further. And as you work, remember that writing is a discovery process. So you're not going to be able to just spit out these perfectly crafted sentences on your first go. I mean, when I was developing this lesson, I started the sentence, backed it up, changed it, edited it. It's a process of discovery that's messy and chaotic, and it's easier said than done. So as you're doing the practice and you're like, frustrated or confused, that's exactly where you should be. If you are, digging deep and pushing yourself into critical thinking. So yes, the purpose of research-based writing is to present that cohesive argument, that orderly, intentional flow of points to persuade the audience toward your viewpoint. But the process of shaping and creating that argument is a discovery process where you will learn to express yourself through outlining, drafting, revising, and editing along the way. So do not expect yourself to have some beautiful sentences right out of the gate. Let's embrace that messy process as we work through this final project. So when we're ready to move on to the next topic, let's just talk a little bit more about the rhetorical situation. So purpose, audience, content, and style. Firstly, looking at the purpose of scholarly writing. The goals are, number one, educate the reader about the outcomes from your sustained exploration, evaluation, and analysis of numerous diverse sources. So you have learned a lot, and you want to bring that forward to really educate and inform your reader about what's going on here, what people are saying, what people are talking about. Why are these things problematic, and what can we do to change those things? You want to, number two, add a new perspective to the conversation. So try as best as possible to avoid just saying like, yes, I agree. Yes, I agree. These people are right. Leverage your perspective as an educated young adult invested in the future of this topic. Show how your stance fits into the conversation. Show what your stance is bringing to the conversation and why that is so important. So showing why your view is somehow adding or shifting the discussion. Number 3, of course, is persuasion, persuading the audience to accept your stance towards the issue. And we're going to do this by activating those rhetorical appeals to ethos, pathos, logos. And of course, by avoiding rhetorical fallacies. So let's not get carried away down a slippery slope argument. Let's not get kind of sloppy with misrepresenting the opposing viewpoint. We'll practice the things that we've learned already. And finally, number 4, the purpose of writing this argument to your audience is to encourage critical thinking. Show the audience how you developed your viewpoints in response to existing norms, existing values, and expectations. So showing your work, so to speak, leading the reader like by the hand, showing them like hand in hand, this is what I observed, this is what I saw, this is what I studied, this is how it connected to life, and this is how it shaped my viewpoints. Show the reader where you used critical thinking to reinforce helpful ideas that you find to be positive and beneficial. Show the reader where you used critical thinking to resist harmful ideas. So to take apart and challenge ideas that you find to be like toxic or harmful. And show the reader how you are using your critical thinking skills to propose some kind of transformations for the future. By showing your reader how you've done these things, it can empower the reader to follow your lead and do the same thing, to practice critical thinking on their own. So that's why one of the reasons why it's important to always think about the purpose and the audience as you're developing the content and the style. Next, let's look at expectations about our audience. So who are we writing for? So far in this class, we have been writing for our fellow English 126 classmates. But now we are looking outward to the wider world. So we're bringing our learning from class outside. We're like intending it outwardly beyond the classroom. So imagine what kind of audience needs to hear your analysis about the topic. So think about who is invested in your topic, who is impacted by your topic, and those are the people, also like who is in control of your topic. Those are the people who you are writing for. So maybe it's young people who are following in your footsteps, maybe your younger self, like people who are susceptible to misusing social media, people who are susceptible to being misled by media representation, other things like that. Young people who are about to embark upon a course of study or maybe an international lifestyle, whatever your topic may have been. Maybe you're just writing for a general public who is being misled or manipulated into some kind of harmful habits or harmful viewpoints. That could be almost any topic. And perhaps also you might be talking to leaders or policymakers who are failing to support the needs and goals of this invested community. So this could be like legislators who are like, lawmakers. It could be policy makers and leaders in like a corporate environment, in some kind of institutional environment, whether that's education, healthcare, something along those lines. So thinking about, do you want to talk, I don't want this to come off wrong, but like, do you want to talk like down the pipeline to like younger people who are up and coming? Do you want to talk like laterally, I guess, to people who are kind of like just in your general position? Or do you want to talk like upward toward like leaders, people in control, people with power? So think about who you're speaking to, and that will determine a lot of what you say and how you say it. Overall, assume that your audience is directly involved in the topic. Speak to that audience as though you are a fellow member of their community. Share the insightful context, critiques, proposals, and context lens significances that you have developed throughout your research and reflection over these past 2 months. And then finally, with all of that in mind, who you're writing for, why you're writing, it can help you make decisions about content and style. So one thing that we talked about when we introduced the project is the format options, thinking outside the boundaries of an essay, whether that's a speech, a letter, some kind of presentation, a sales pitch, a web page. A web page is helpful because it can include images, sound bites, video clips, whatever it may be. Maybe a mock trial or like the opening statement of a court case, magazine or news coverage. Take inspiration from the research that you've done. As you were doing research and you saw some source that you were like, oh, wow, I love this source. I'm energized by it. I'm inspired by it. This is intriguing. This is a really effective communication. So go back to that source and think about how you might mimic those kinds of presentation styles. Be sure to humanize your voice. Make sure that you are speaking from a first person point of view. Make sure that you are bringing yourself, like your real true self, into the argument. And also address your audience, remembering that your audience is also people who are, in all of their behind the scenes, like whatever is going on, just remember that you're a human being and you're speaking with human beings. And one way to do that is to use the I, we, us, instead of the they or one or people types of nouns and pronouns. And then also using clear and direct reasoning. So don't try to compose sentences that are wildly confusing or overly technical. Try to be clear, try to be direct. And of course, include evidence. You should always include evidence in a scholarly argument, in an argument of any time. So refer to connections across your sources. So try to look at how multiple people have introduced this context. Here's how. Multiple people have criticized these problems. Here's how. Multiple people are working towards solutions. Here's how. Evidence can come from summarize and paraphrase. Not all evidence is a direct quotation, but even when you're summarizing from a quote or summarizing from an argument or paraphrasing from somebody's point of view, to provide that context, you still need to include citation in MLA format, which is something we will learn next week. Do be sure to include direct quotes, whether those are short words, little phrases, or entire sentences, always making sure that we cite our quotes according to MLA format, which again, we'll learn it soon, but this needs to be on our radar. And then as you're going back through your research, try to avoid quotes that are longer than 4 lines. So when you type this up into your doc, if it takes up longer than 4 lines to type out that quote, try to use ellipsis or try to just excerpt the most powerful phrases or sentences. Unless those block quotes are strictly beneficial, then we will learn ways to cite them. So that's why you're writing, who you're writing for, and how to present that argument. Next, we're going to look at, it might be helpful to stop, pause the video. I know this is kind of a whirlwind. Look down at your notes. I know if we were in class, I would see your faces and I would have a lot more time to, pause and ask questions and explore your ideas. So here's my reminder. Please pause the video. Look down at your notes and see, where do you have questions? Where are you starting to come up with ideas for your own writing? How might you apply some of those ideas about purpose, audience, content, form, and style to your project as it's beginning to take shape in your mind and in your notes? So take a moment, and then when you're ready to move on, resume the video, and we will look at some common structures for organizing those parts of the argument. Okay, Firstly, we want to look at the common ingredients that we will see in all kinds of arguments. So firstly, every argument is going to need to provide some type of context that can orient the reader about the situation. This might look like taking a glance back at some historical background and leading us up to some recent developments. We don't want to spend too much time on context, so maybe, one or two or three sentences to really just summarize it in a quick glance. You might provide a snapshot of the relevant discourse community. So what kinds of people are invested in this topic? That will set the scene to understand where this research is coming from and where your voice is fitting in. You may want to take some time to clarify and distinguish between the meaning of key terms. So really clarifying the difference between maybe two types of terms, maybe emphasizing like when I use this term, I'm trying to use these kinds of meanings, not these other kinds of meanings. So please don't misunderstand this discussion. And the textbook has done a lot of work. I think we've had this has been discussed in, I think, 3 of the chapters that we read so far this semester. This idea of really clarifying what you mean and distinguishing between your ideas. And then also emphasizing and introducing what the major context lenses are. So if you're going to speak about the psychological impacts, you may want to take a moment, like a sentence, to discuss what you mean by psychology. If you're going to speak about the cultural impacts, you may want to take a moment to speak about what that means to you. Going back to the lesson slides and looking at the major questions and then the subtopics, maybe doing a little bit of outside research to get a definition that works for you, and of course bringing that in with citation. Speaking to your classmates and your instructor to help clarify your understanding of those context lenses. So no matter how you shape your argument, you always want to include a little bit of context. Oops. You also, no matter what form you use, you will need to include a clear, direct, 3-part thesis statement. So what is your stance? How is your argument going to change or transform or influence something about this topic? An outline of how you're going to support that stance. So a roadmap for how you are going to guide the reader through certain topics, certain reasoning, and a statement about the larger significance, a statement about why this topic is so important to some of those context lenses that we've learned in class. How this argument is going to change the way we address, psychology, society, culture, history, politics, aesthetics, ethnicity, gender, wealth, ecology, symbolism, etc. And then explicit reasoning, evidence, reasoning, analysis. Throughout your topic, you will present claims that develop that thesis, that state what your stance is, and you will need to include explicit evidence, so direct quotations clearly cited, detailed reasoning, so why that evidence is connected to your claim and why is it connected to this point that you're trying to make. And analysis. How does this piece of my discussion, how does this claim, evidence, and reasoning support the larger significance of my thesis? So keeping that in mind, no matter how you format your work. You will always need to address opposing or alternative views. Since it's an argument, especially since it's an academic scholarly argument, we need to show that we have thought about who else is sitting at this table and what their views are. So we can do this in a number of ways. We can make space for alternative views to coexist at the same time. So these are views that you might all be familiar with. I'm bringing in this other kind of perspective, which is equally valid, equally strong. We might be rejecting alternate views by carefully critiquing them, showing why they are harmful, showing where they might be using fallacies, and saying, like some people have held this type of viewpoint and that's not okay because of these reasons. And we could have a mixed response. We could acknowledge some of the merits to a certain viewpoint, but we might wish to either push it even further. So say like up to this point, people have argued through this position, but that's not enough. We need to take it further. Or hedge or place limitations and exceptions on that viewpoint. So people commonly argue through this point of view, but that doesn't work for these people. That doesn't work in these circumstances. That doesn't work when we think about this context shift. So that's kind of the mixed response. Like up to a point, I'm totally on board with your ideas, but it needs to go further, but it stops here. So those are some things to keep in mind. Context, thesis, explicit argument with evidence, reasoning, analysis, and addressing the opposing or alternate viewpoints. Now we're going to shift into looking at some of the common formulas for mixing those ingredients. So we have the Aristotelian formula, which really emphasizes persuasion, that ethos, pathos, and logos that we've spoken about previously. The Toulmin Formula, which really emphasizes, I would say more like mechanical and technical accuracy, really like, I don't know, almost like a scientific focus on relevance and the clarity of the argument. The Rogerian Formula, which emphasizes common ground and discussing the topic rather than winning the argument. And then I'm going to introduce Indigenous wisdom from some ongoing research into epistemological methodology that I'm working on, which emphasizes a personal, local, and spiritual responsibility toward the topic. So the first three are like everyday, everyone across the country who's in the US education system is really getting exposed to Aristotelian, Toulmin, and Rogerian arguments when they take their critical thinking class. I personally feel a little bit uncomfortable with the Eurocentrism of all of that, so I like to try and find a way to shift it. And this is my additional gift to all of y'all. So let's jump into these 4 common argument formulas. So first we'll look at the Aristotelian formula. This is coming from around 350 BCE, so 2,500 years ago, I don't know, a lot of years ago in Greece. The goal is to win that argument. Protect your argument against refutation. Aim to advance your stance as the best and most superior stance, and refute counter examples by disproving them or undermining their value. So that's the goal. Rhetorical strategies, as we've spoken about before, really emphasizing that connection to ethos, pathos, and logos. And a word of caution, because we can get excited by be over powerful with our argument, and it could lead us toward not ethical fallacies. Yeah, sometimes ethical fallacies, sometimes pathetic fallacies, logical fallacies. So just make sure that you're not going overboard into the realm of fallacies. The basic ingredients, these are the most common in academic writing throughout the US. So first of all, a hook, attracting your audience in an artful and entertaining way. Context, showing why your viewpoint is important to the larger world. So once you get your audience ready to listen to you, you kind of show them why why what you are about to say is hugely important. And then you express your stance. So emphatically and persuasively, you get kind of hyped up when you present your thesis. Providing support, as always, including credible relevant and powerful evidence, focusing on the value of expertise, the value of, like professional or like eminent or powerful, famous scholarship. Refutation. So always making sure that you address the weakness of your counter argument. And then the conclusion, where you restate your stance, your reasoning, and your significance. So this is what we are all most familiar with in our education. This is kind of like the roots of K-12 writing, which is perfectly fine, perfectly effective. Next, we'll look at the Toulmin Formula. This one's coming from 1950 in the UK, about 1950. The way I like to think about this is it does rely on ethos, logos, and pathos, but kind of like in a different font, if you will. The emphasis is more strongly connected to statistical, mathematical, and scientific evidence. The logical pattern of reasoning is oftentimes it's more like cause and effect. It really emphasizes a clear and direct reasoning pathway. This is helpful for arguments that don't have a lot of nuance, complexity. This is a helpful argument formula for like what you might consider to be like a cut and dry issue. Like these are the facts, and this is why my stance is correct. The appeal to pathos in this kind of argument structure is often based on like the principle of the matter or the ethics, the morality of what's right and wrong, rather than trying to inspire feeling and emotion, more so on like, these are the values, these are the ethics. When it comes to proving your stance in the Toulmin Formula, there are some common techniques. So number one is like that matter of fact point of view. So argue that your viewpoint should basically be accepted as a fact, or argue that previously accepted facts, accepted viewpoints are just no longer valid, out of date, obsolete. One common argument could be like this. Like video games cause violent behavior. So like the end, that's a fact, is kind of like what you're about to argue. Also, like as you're developing your argument, you'll make evaluation style claims. So arguing why something is good, better, or best, arguing why something is bad, worse, or worst. An example maybe could be like Halo is the most influential violent game. Like this is an example that's developing your overall thesis. And the other ingredient that's really common in these kinds of Toulmin formulas is proposing change. So proposing some kind of policies, procedures, or actions, either saying what we should do or shouldn't do. For example, saying like video game content should be censored, would be kind of how we would approach this kind of topic. In the next slide, we're going to dig deeper into the basic ingredients. The language is a little bit technical. So I'll introduce it here. The ingredients are the claims, the grounds, the warrants, the qualifiers, the backing, and the rebuttal. And I don't know, for me, it's just like, this language kind of like puts me off. It rubs me the wrong way. It's too like technical. I get like a vibe. I don't know. So we'll look at the ingredients and look at some examples. So the claim, this one's easy. This is the opinion. My grandfather should use a hearing aid. And I took this model, I adapted it from this link that you guys can access when you look at the slides, the Toulmin model argument. So the claim, you might say, my grandfather should use a hearing aid, kind of coming out there stating it as like a fact. The grounds, which is just the data or the evidence. Over 70% of people older than 65 have difficulty hearing, and hearing aids are known to improve hearing ability. Afterwards, we would give like specific evidence, but this, in slide format, you can't develop an entire paragraph. So the claim, the grounds, so introducing some context, introducing some evidence or data, And then the warrants, this is kind of like a principle or a assumption that's widely accepted. Hearing aids help most people improve their hearing. And then a qualifier. So what's common in the Toulmin formula is to say, like, this is the way it should be. Here's the reason why, except, sure, not for everybody. Or, yes, I see that there are exceptions. Like you're protecting yourself against refutation. So a qualifier or a limitation on your argument shows that you kind of know that there's no real such thing as like one size fits all, and you're protecting yourself against anybody attacking you in the future. So saying hearing aids help most people improve their hearing, apart from those with severe damage to the ear. Next, we can look at what they call backing. It's just additional data, so furthering your point. Furthermore, hearing aids are easily accessible over the counter to purchase, and you might include some information for this, like you might go into Target and take a picture of the hearing aids, something like that. And then finally, the rebuttal. So this is where you think to yourself, like, what kinds of refutations or attacks or disagreements might come my way? And I predict maybe somebody might say, like, okay, we're talking about people older than 65 and we're asking them to use like a technical gadget that, like, it's a common stereotype that older people have struggle with technology. So we might include that as part of our argument and then say, technical support is always available if problems should arise. So here's kind of an example of how that Toulmin argument might look. It has, the argument is stated like kind of as a strong fact. The evidence is more based on like statistics, more based on like science and that type of thing. The reasoning is typically cause and effect. So hearing aids help people improve their hearing. It includes limitations. So we're aware that people are going to try to attack our argument in the future, and we're looking out for that in advance. We're including additional data, and it's kind of like a back and forth. Like, here's my claim, data, reasoning, limitations, data, reasoning, limitations, or rebuttals. Okay, next we will move on and we'll talk about this in class, and we will talk about this in the Canvas discussion space as well. Moving on to the next one, the Rogerian Formula. So this comes from about the 1970s in the US. The goal or the purpose is to reach a common ground. So to open the topic up for discussion rather than to win an argument or rather than to protect yourself from losing an argument. We want to demonstrate understanding. So we demonstrate that we understand the issue. We demonstrate that we understand the other person's perspective. And we hope to be understood by them as well. And the idea is when you're introducing your argument, you want to introduce your argument as equally valuable to what's already been said, rather than as a replacement or a rebuttal to ongoing arguments. Some of the common characteristics are a mutual respect and understanding. So the rhetorical context is that relationship with your audience. So in the Aristotelian and the Toulmin Formula, your relationship with the audience is like you are here to tell them why you are right. In the Rogerian Formula, you're kind of here to join with them in this discussion and add a perspective from your own point of view. So you want to begin from a stance of showing that you understand existing perspectives and you understand the context before you share your own view. You want to address the reader with like a comfortable, personable, like friendly type of voice. And you want to sort of show like my views can coexist peacefully with your views. So it's like a mutual respect and a mutual understanding. The basic ingredients, firstly, this begins a little bit differently from like the thesis claim type of pattern. Firstly, begin with the context, introducing the problem. Show a comprehensive overview of the problem at hand. So what is wrong? How is it harmful? What are people saying? And then leading into beginning with the alternate viewpoint. In the previous two arguments, we begin, my view comes first, and then I acknowledge or attack other views. In this stance, we say, okay, here's the problem that we are all suffering from. Secondly, here are some like solutions or experiences that are valuable that we should understand. So give a fair voice to the existing views and demonstrate that you understand their stance. So without oversimplifying, without stereotyping, I understand these views. And then introduce the reasoning, the value, the merits of your own view. So demonstrate before you just come out and strongly state your view, kind of saying like, well, this is what's going on and this is what people are saying and like, that's okay. But another way to think about it might change something in society. If we think about this differently, then we might be able to improve our cultural awareness. So demonstrating the value, the significance, the impact of kind of like not just of your perspective, but the value of shifting the perspective. And then conclude by developing your thesis. So finishing the argument with like, this is the problem. We all agree it's bad. This is what has been going on. This is what has been discussed. And that's okay. But we can do even better if we shift or grow or expand the way we approach this problem. Look at these benefits that could conclude. So here's my suggestion for how we should shift our views. So it's kind of like your thesis is delayed in the argument. It's not the very, very last thing because you still need to support that thesis with reasoning, evidence, analysis. But the thesis comes, in the bottom half of the project, as opposed to the other two where you'll do like context, your views will be like the main part of every paragraph. In this one, it's like you introduce the context, and then sometimes the other existing views are the main point of each paragraph or each topic. So this one is kind of a different stance than what we are usually exposed to in K-12, but it is something that you may have already seen during your research. So we'll talk about this in class. We can use the Canvas discussion space to speak about it as we decide what kind of argument formula is going to be most helpful for me. And then finally, I want to introduce some Indigenous patterns. This is coming from Cree culture around the 1600s in the land that is currently known as Canada. The purpose or the goal of this kind of Indigenous reasoning and argumentation is to emphasize both the personal and political domain of knowledge. So how personal, spiritual understanding is also connected to community-based, power-based understanding. Some of the underlying assumptions or the underlying values and perspectives for this kind of reasoning is to acknowledge that learning and research is a personal journey of discovery and healing. So this kind of argument structure can be really helpful for anybody who is researching and discussing a sensitive and personal topic. So acknowledging that, like, yes, this is an academic scholarly project, but it fulfills a function of a personal journey for discovery and healing. Building knowledge through this kind of Indigenous practice should always be a political act of decolonization. So by discovering truths and by healing like maybe psychological and cultural wounds, you participate in an act of decolonization. So decolonization usually just means breaking away from the Eurocentric, often capitalistic, often, extractive and dominating viewpoints that come from like Eurocentric worldviews. Decolonization often means returning to social norms, like psychological or intellectual ways of knowing that your community practiced before it was taken over by a different community. So doing research and sharing your research should be motivated toward overcoming some of the power structures and some of the enforced ideologies that stem from Eurocentric colonization. Often, that's violent, dehumanizing, etc. And then, so like, what is the purpose of learning? What is the purpose of research? What is the purpose of building knowledge? Now, what is the purpose of sharing that knowledge? Communicating your research outward to the audience. The purpose of that should be seen as a cultural act of healing and resurgence that embraces the severed way of knowing the world, of shaping the world. So kind of saying that, like, by sharing my research with you, the audience, we will be able to touch into ways of knowing and shaping and understanding life that have been traditionally taken away from us, the ways of knowing that have been traditionally discounted or removed. Usually those are emotional, spiritual, intuitive, land-based, story-based knowledge is often discounted and devalued under colonization in favor of Enlightenment principles of like logic, reason, proof, things like that. So these topics, this type of reasoning structure is helpful if you're speaking about spirituality, faith, personal journeys of undergoing maybe mental health concerns, undergoing physical health concerns. This type of reasoning structure is helpful if you're doing research into a topic that brings up a lot of emotion for you. This formula allows you a space to explore the significance of that emotional response. The emphasis is on responsive accountability. So saying like, I, as a learner, as a researcher, as a knowledge builder, it's my responsibility to be in context with the people's, communities, places, and imaginative structures that are connected with this knowledge, with this understanding. It's hard to explain kind of in slide format, but overall you're trying to say like my research topic. So maybe you're speaking about disability. Maybe you're speaking about incarceration. Maybe you're speaking about the medical industry. This topic has important impacts on the people who are experiencing the issues, the community, whether that be the family community, the city, the state, wherever. The place itself, so like the environment, speaking about whether it's like the incarceration environment, the hospital institution, the medical sphere, things like that. And this topic has important impacts on the way we imagine, the way we perceive, the way we feel. Knowledge in this formula should be formed through individual and social consensus. So this is where like research and connection comes in. This is where we are responding not just what I say and what I think, but also to the context of what we have learned from others through interview, through conversation, through research. So that's the social consensus. Also, knowledge should be action oriented. So the argument should be directed toward taking steps to change the way we think, act, behave, change the way we value certain policies and procedures, whether that be legal structures, cultural norms and ideologies, etc. So your argument, the knowledge that you share should be connected, like the they say, I say structure should be connected toward making actionable changes towards the topic. The basic ingredients, introduce yourself in connection with the topic. So storytelling and narrative building. I am concerned with the topic that we're discussing today because these are the experiences that I have had. These experiences have had an impact upon myself, my community, the places that I interact with, and the way I and my people imagine and see the world around us. So introduce yourself, introduce your connection to the topic in a way that is very biographical and very narrative. And then introducing the community's involvement with the topic. And this is where you share from research, you share from, especially if you've done interview, and you're sharing other people's testimony and accounts. And this could be, you could have research sources that include interview sources. And you say, like those in our community have these experiences, these concerns. This is how the problems impact them and affect them. This is how me and the people in my community are already working toward change. And then when you're doing the analysis, you want to explore the emotional, spiritual, and intellectual outcomes of these viewpoints. So if we understand these changes, if me and my community take upon this changed perspective, these changed actions, this is how it will heal our collective emotional wounds. This is how it will uplift our positive emotional responses. This is how it will validate and emphasize our spiritual views. This is how it will change our intellectual understanding, our cognitive, logical understanding of the topic. So this one was long because I'm not very good at expressing it yet. So we'll talk about it more. And in the Canvas page, I will link some resources for all of these argument structures that will kind of help to clarify. And then finally, just a reminder to put your own spin on whichever argument formula that you choose. Whatever you're doing, make sure that you draw upon your research to provide fair and comprehensive coverage of your topic. Give space to relevant viewpoints even when you disagree with them. Draw support, so quotations, from sources that share your stance. I am not alone in my argument. Many other people are working towards this goal. Include personal experiences to support your stance. Even in the Toulmin example, which is the most disconnected type of feel to it, even in that example, you can be including your personal connection to the topic. No matter what argument formula you are using, focus and frame the conversation around your interest points. Even if your interests are a bit niche or a bit marginalized within the loudest and the most common arguments in the research. Tell the reader, in other words, where are you sitting at the table? Select quotes and details that help the reader understand what the conversation is and understand where you sit so that as readers, we can join in your position on the argument. And then develop commentary. After you share your evidence, develop commentary to critique the dangers of views that you oppose. Celebrate the values of views that you accept, and negotiate with or transform the views where you have mixed feelings. Don't forget to do your week 12 writing journal. This is available in Canvas. We'll be working toward it during class. And if you have questions, comments, thoughts, and ideas, please be sure to use the Canvas space to share those or make note. And when we connect in class on Tuesday, we will have a chance to address those one-on-one.